Great. Well, I think actually, Steffi set it up best with that sort of segue of Mike Bloomberg. I think as Chief Marketing Officer of Bloomberg Media, one of my most favorite actions of my job is actually propagating Mike's values and his sort of agenda around sustainability, around DE&I, around innovation, and really thinking about how do we help provide the content that all of us as readers, as subscribers, as consumers of content want to learn more about around those critical issues around ESG, et cetera. And then also on the advertising side, how do we help our partners really best tell their story and best have that message around these really, really critical issues. So delighted to be here today, delighted to be here with Ilka to talk about that. And I think that's a good segue. I think more than ever this past year, it's been critical for brands to really show up for society. And in many cases, brands and private sector leadership is really being looked at globally as sort of taking sort of a stand and leading us forward during this tremendous amount of change and difficulty that we're all experiencing. Something like 94% of CEOs really view their core responsibility as laying out what their organization's role in society is today. And that responsibility obviously trickles down through management and through the entire organization. Ilka, BMW's corporate purpose really centers around making mobility safer, right? It really talks about making that more connected, making it more sustainable. I'd love for you to share a little bit about how you and your peers in leadership have really focused on that and really had that be your North Star in terms of how your management philosophy and your leadership philosophy.
I think you're absolutely right. I think especially COVID showed us that at the end of the day, we as corporates have to take over responsibility outside the boundaries of our companies. So within COVID, for example, of course, we donated a lot of masks at the time where masks were not available. We set up a hospital in South Africa, for example, to support the South African society with caring about people within COVID. And with regard to mobility, I think we are talking a lot about mobility these days because of the IAA. I think for us, it's absolutely clear, and Oliver Zipse, our CEO, made it very clear yesterday that mobility is a deep-seated need of people. For over 100 years, people want to have individual mobility. For us, and for me personally, individual mobility is freedom, or means freedom, and also means prosperity. And as you might know, BMW is shaping mobility now for over 100 years. And it's a long time, and we are pretty aware that we now have to change dramatically to sustain this freedom. And therefore, we are aiming and very ambitious to lead the path to a more sustainable, more connected, and also a safer mobility in the future. And what I believe is that this mission or this passion we have also attracts a lot of people coming to BMW and also inspires our customers. And maybe give you one example. We have a lot of people, and we had just a One Young World here in Munich a couple of weeks ago. So we had a lot of employees who are affiliated with Fridays for Future, for example, but they are working for BMW because they are convinced that by doing something, taking action, they can really change something instead of just going on the street. And they came up with wonderful ideas on recycled material in the car, which is now going to a series production. And I'm very proud to say that this purpose really attracts talents, and that's, for my job, the most important thing.
It's so interesting that you say that. We have what we call the Bloomberg Brand Health System, which is a global study that looks at over 500 brands globally, and we surveyed over 15,000 people, and it's in the US, the UK, Germany, France, and APAC. And we look at drivers of brand leadership and brand vision, and we're seeing an inextricable link between purpose and leadership today. It's impossible to separate it. And I think just even a few years ago, the common philosophy of that was, that's a millennial thing, or that's a Gen Z thing. And I think that our research is really showing that C-suites, business decision makers, financial decision makers, high net worth individuals of all age groups, it's not a demographic, it's more of a sort of a psychographic, are really demanding that that be part of a brand's message and part of a brand's, not only their message and their communications, but also the way that they behave. And I think you see that in employee engagement and in recruiting, et cetera. And obviously, BMW is on the forefront of that.
Absolutely.
So when you think about that, Ilka, and you said something that was really interesting to me around freedom. That's obviously an incredibly aspirational and ambitious mission. How do you guys really communicate that, I'd say, both to customers, but also in some of your recruiting efforts?
I think the good thing with BMW is we just don't stand for only talking. We are standing for actions for over 100 years, and maybe sometimes we talk when we already have done and achieved things. And I think looking at the facts, it's very easy to see that until the end of this year, we will have sold about 1 million electrified cars already. So when others are talking, announcing, we're already delivering, and we are not at the end of a process, or we are in the middle of that transformation to electromobility. And our target is very clear. We made it very clear on the IAA. Until the end of this century, we'll have 10 million electrified cars on the road. And I think that's a clear statement. That's the reason why we will launch about a dozen pure electrified cars until 2023. But I think we all know that it's not really enough just replacing combustion engine by an electrical drivetrain. So you have to really rethink the whole value chain. We have to look at the whole value chain, and that's the reason why we came up with very clear targets. And it's not an announcement for 2050 or something, when none of us will still be in the board, I guess. So we announced very clear targets. We identified very clear targets. We want to reduce the CO2 emission per vehicle by 40% until 2030, and this includes the whole value chain, from the supply chain to production to the usage of the car. And I think that's very ambitious. And that's the reason. I mean, we came up with the targets. We are paid on the basis of these targets in the board. So our payment is related to that. So that's good. So we are all very keen to achieve these targets. And on the other hand, of course, this made it possible that we could join the race to zero and the 1.5-degree Paris Agreement target.
I think I want to get to circularity in a moment, but I think before I do, one thing that you said that was very interesting there that I think is a really good point to stress, and our data shows this as well, is it's not just a consumer-oriented reality that we're talking about here in terms of demanding sort of authentic purpose, demanding some of these massive behavioral shifts that we're seeing, and BMW obviously being on the forefront of that. But it's also B2B, and it's within the entire supply chain of businesses requiring this of other businesses that they want to partner with. And I think in our study, 73% of business leaders are saying that they want to have a well-integrated purpose, and that helps their company navigate disruption. And we know that 77% of BDMs have a preference for working with companies that identify as purpose-driven, right? So it's not just about the end customer or even what that means for profitability, but certainly about those B2B partnerships as well.
Yeah, and my experience is in many transformation processes, whenever you lead the way, whenever you tell people what's the direction, whether it's inside the company or outside, if you set ambitious targets and people understand the reason why, they will follow you inside the company and outside the company. So our suppliers are very pleased to discuss with us now the reduction of the CO2 footprint in the supply chain. And of course, one big issue there is green energy in the supply chain. For example, with the aluminium production, we source from energy. Well, we source the aluminium made by the energy of solar panels, for example, in Dubai. And as you might know, the i4, the iX, which we're just launching, the production will be powered by hydroelectrics from, the region here.
That's amazing. So I think that's a great segue to circularity, even in a more focused way here. As you've already mentioned, BMW has a vision to make individual mobility emission-free, which is obviously almost as lofty as the notion of freedom, right? And that requires a real expertise in not only technology and science and digitization, but also sort of the courage to do that, to your point, and really lead the way there. Can you talk a little bit more about your perspective on circularity and the circular economy and how BMW thinks about that?
I think we have a good example of what we think about circularity on the IAA at the moment.
Yes.
It's our BMW i Vision Circular. And the intention of that car was to show that you can build a car out of 100% circular or secondary material. And you can recycle it. And as I said earlier, our approach is really to rethink the whole thing. Because it's all about reducing the material you need. It's about of course, reusing it. For example, the batteries, you can reuse them. We have a good example in Leipzig, for example, in our plant, where we have old batteries from the i3 being there for the wind power and the electric storage there. So it's good examples of reuse. And of course, then you have to think about recycling the material. And I think, especially on the battery side, we have good examples. We are pretty clear that 90% of the battery can be recycled. We have done already research on that. And therefore, we are pretty optimistic, and we set another target that we want to increase the secondary material in our vehicles up to 50%. Today, it's about 30%.
Wonderful. That's a good time for me to mention how we're...
And one thing I want to add, this is our perspective. We want to give our customers sheer driving pleasures. And I think that's exactly what every car at BMW has to deliver, no matter it's 100% recycled or not. And there's no compromise about that thing in BMW.
You have to make it irresistible, right? It can't be like you feeling like you're making a sacrifice for that sustainable approach.
No compromises.
Absolutely. I think in terms of sort of leading the charge and reinventing, I think one of the things we think, and we've thought deeply about at Bloomberg Media over the past few years, is actually a few years ago, we sort of had this moment where climate change was obviously reaching critical mass, and the largest, most significant change since the Industrial Revolution, and yet there was not a single media brand focused on climate or sustainability. And so to kind of circle back to where we started this conversation, with Mike Bloomberg at our helm, he's the special envoy to the UN on climate, with sort of a lot of our editorial already focused on climate, we sort of had this existential moment where we wanted to do more and wanted to think about how we do more. But to your point, think about how not to make this just more of the same kind of doom and gloom around climate change, and sort of about how close the end is near, right? But really think about what's the data telling us, and where are the solutions going? Where is there positivity? Where is there moments of light? What is great work that is being done? And certainly not wash over sort of the realities, but really use data to tell us that story, and really take a solutions-oriented and optimistic-oriented approach to sustainability. And so we launched Bloomberg Green 2 years ago, which is our dedicated brand focused on climate and focused on the solutions of sort of a changing world and ESG. And so it's really exciting that sort of we're introducing that sort of, a similar analog to how we're really rethinking in our business terms what that can mean and what we can bring for society along those lines.
Yeah, and as I said, it's very motivating for our people, and you're attracting different people, you get new customers, and exactly. I think that's the way how it should go. Exactly.
And I think similar to how you all are approaching this, I think we're trying to use our, authentically what sets us apart. And at the end of the day, Bloomberg, even Bloomberg Media, is a data company. We process 1 billion pieces of data every single day on the Bloomberg terminal. We have more ESG data coming in on a daily basis than any other company in the world. And so how do we actually harness all that data to sort of remove that polarization and sort of have a productive conversation about some of these issues? And we really lean into that fact-based journalism in order to do that, which then also leads to a great environment for our advertising partners and for people who want to communicate around these ideas, because it's sort of a safe, trusted environment to do so. So it's been really interesting to see the progression of that over the last couple years as we head into COP26 this fall, sort of how we're going to even expand the brand even further. Mm-hmm. Great. Thinking about sustainability, I think we often talk about how the S in ESG is often overlooked. And I think over this past year, I've already talked about a lot of the craziness that we've all witnessed and lived through here. But certainly in the States with the killing of George Floyd, certainly with the pandemic and what that's kind of spotlighted in terms of the inequities in the world, we had another moment similar to the one I just described around climate, where we sort of said we have to do more around equality. And as a media brand, showcase what equality means and sort of what a global view of equality is, right? It could be race in America, but it's colorism in Singapore. And how do we really tell that, again, bringing that sort of fact-based approach to this topic, but how do we really bring that together and really talk about what's happening in society, what's happening in financing, what's happening in terms of private sectors and really trying to evolve this. And so we launched Bloomberg Equality this past year, and that's been another really exciting foray into sort of a cause-based vertical for us. I'd love to hear what you all are doing as a female leader, being on stage here in automotive. It's not lost on me. I'm certainly it's not lost on the audience here. Would love to hear from you on how BMW thinks about DE&I.
I think, first of all, I couldn't agree more. The S is very important, and of course you can imagine that this is my home turf as the CHRO of BMW. And I think especially in crisis situation like last year, where people were really worried about their health, about their families, about their life, organizing it during COVID, the lockdown, etc. I think we could really contribute a lot to the S for our people. And of course, first of all, we look for social responsibility for our people. And that means a lot in these times. Because of course, the transformation from combustion engine to electrified powertrains, the change in the digital world, they all have to be done in a way that our employees will follow us. And they have the feeling that we take care about them and about their jobs, that they give them perspectives, even though maybe the guy who is working in combustion engines will not assemble combustion engines in the future, but needs to have a perspective, for example, to build an electrified motor. So that's, I think, first of all, our responsibility. And we talked a lot to our people last year about what they understand under social responsibility internally. And they said, first, it's the security of jobs. It's health and safety, and of course, I mean, you can imagine with COVID, this issue was brought on the table in an even bigger way. And of course, it's the way how the company takes care of the whole environment, of the work environment, and everything, like financial issues for the employees and taking care of them in difficult personal situations, etc. And I think COVID was one. But jobs, for me, is the most important issue with regard to social responsibility of our people. And secondly, as I said earlier, companies can't stick within the boundaries of their company. I mean, we are acting in 140 countries because we have customers in 140 countries. And of course, our social responsibility also comprises being an active member of the communities in these countries, not only where we have production, but also where we have sales. And there's a lot of activities around education we are doing there. It's a lot about culture, and it's a lot of sports. And we are focusing on issues where we don't just give money to the communities, because everybody can give money to something, but we are focusing on topics where we really can contribute with our knowledge, with our network, and with our creativity, and we support with our own people normally. So when we run projects in our countries, we normally use our people to support the communities. And they're doing it voluntarily, and that's a great thing. So you're absolutely right. And now coming to the diversity and inclusion issue, Steffi mentioned it already. I had been the plant director of Dingolfing, 20,000 people. It's a great job, I can tell you. It was great fun. I love the people in Dingolfing. It's Niederbayern. It's really a nice plant. And what always fascinated me is that you can do that because you like people and you're interested in their processes. And so leadership is quite easy, also as a woman. And for us, of course, diversity and inclusion is a topic. I'm pushing it in the company. We've achieved a lot in the last years with regard to the gender quota, etc. But we are not at the end. And there's a lot of other dimensions. I think you mentioned that. And we are really doing a lot. We had over 100,000 people being involved in our Diversity Week, where we put activities all over the world. And I think it's the awareness has to increase. And then, of course, you need some very practical actions also. So as joint leadership, for example, we came up with that program to encourage people to share leadership positions, to take care of their children on the one side, and to share leadership positions. It's a good program.
Ilka, just curious on your opinion on this. Do you think the pandemic maybe helped accelerate some of these changes in a positive way, or do you think it sort of had the opposite effect?
I believe there was nothing there before COVID. Within COVID, nothing came on the table that hadn't been there before. But of course, COVID for some issues was a booster. And I think for the health and safety issue, it is a booster. I think that we will see changes in the future. I think everybody of us was a little bit smiling when we went to Asia and saw people with masks. I think now it's getting more normal, and I think it will remain, at least for big crowds of people. And of course, the way of working will change. And I wouldn't say that you can say new work is just the question of number of days in home office. Yeah, but there's a lot more to do with regard to how to act in the future, how to organize work on a hybrid basis, yeah, and how to build a work environment that really makes people be very creative, collaborative when they are in the office and not just sitting in their office and doing single work. So I think there's a lot of things that were boosted by COVID, and I think we have to increase the speed to come up with solutions on the topics which have been there before, but now are more urgent with regard to solutions.
Certainly. I think something that we noticed too was sort of what the pandemic did in terms of shedding light on the intersectionality of different issues. So I think even when we were talking about, ESG certainly is a good example of, it's not, a lot of these are not just climate-oriented or sustainable-oriented or equality-oriented, right? There's things that cross, like the digital divide, for example. So when all of a sudden people, kids aren't in school and can't access technology, we have a problem, right? Yeah. So I think that's what's been really interesting, is at least expedite, I think, the acknowledgement of those issues and then try to come up with solutions, or at least more conversation around where we can go from here.
Actually, we were quite happy because we handed out to our apprentices laptops long before COVID, and so we could really train and educate them during COVID while sitting at home. So it was different from many schools in Germany where the digital infrastructure was not that good, and it took quite a long time to ramp that up. And I think that's very good. And also individual mobility became more popular during COVID again, because people don't want to sit in the subway. Yeah, and don't want to sit in an Uber car, yeah, and so I think that has also impacted mobility and the use of mobility, and we have to have a close look on what is happening in the future there.
I think that's really interesting and full circle to our chat here of freedom again, and sort of what that did for, in terms of what you were just saying there, of giving us much more flexibility and sort of personal control over, our daily lives, whether that be where and how we're working, or where and how we're, handling childcare, or where and how we're choosing to spend time with others or not. And I think that that's been, certainly something that we've all had to reconcile with. And then coming out of this, or when we approach getting back to normal, or, I for one am back in the office 3 days a week, it's forcing me to think about, well, what do I want to change back versus what's sort of fixed at this point? What did I really enjoy or think was a benefit of that kind of freedom that I found in some of these areas? And so I think that's forced a really great conversation between employers and employees and just, people alike around how we're going to come out of this in a better way.
Absolutely. But I can promise you, we will lead the path to future mobility. We have done over the last 100 years, and we are pretty clear that if you, in the future, if as a company you want to be the best, you have to be the best for the world also. And that's what we are aiming at, that's our ambition. That's why I'm, since 27 years, waking up in the morning, rushing to the office and doing my job.
And if you want to have a brand that's sticky and that has affinity with the loyal customer base, you have to do that too.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Ilka, I'm so inspired by our conversation today. It's so lovely to be on stage with a fellow female leader here and learning all about what BMW is doing, particularly around circularity. Very excited to see what comes next, and looking forward to many more chats with you. Not sure if we have time for any questions or...
Question maybe after the conference.
Okay.
But thank you for this amazing conversation.